Our next speaker is going to talk about it for our military, and he's got a 25-year history of looking through NASA technology and finding ways to use it for a whole variety of purposes. We haven't met except over the telephone before this, and his enthusiasm got me all fired up for being glad about all the work that's done in space. So Joe, it's yours.
Thank you, Howard. Howard,
Yes.
could you key this up?
Barry, you want to
It's okay.
handle that?
My attention was.
It's all right, Barry. Well, while Barry is keying up the PowerPoint presentation, I realize there's a time constraint, so I'll be as brief as I can. First of all, I'd like to thank NASA for the opportunity to continue to blow NASA's horn with regard to technology, transitioning, and spinning off NASA-developed technologies. And in all honesty, I thank God every day for the tech transfer program and for the spin-off program. I've had a wonderful, an absolutely marvelous life and a wonderful experience over for the better part of 30 years in terms of working with NASA personnel. That's okay. With NASA personnel, with individuals, with private people, with sick people, with healthy people, and largely and almost to a point, to a case, it was made possible by virtue of my participation in the various NASA programs. When I was approached and asked to speak with regard to one particular success, which I'm going to present today, I'm going to take you back to STS-43. That's 23 years ago and 70 missions ago. A NASA technology was born in space. They made microspheres, microscopic spheres, and actually started in 1982 and is continuing through the present time and into some very significant avenues of endeavor that are absolutely critical to the national defense, as you'll see. So I titled this Environmental Benefits from Space, and I took the liberty of placing the STS-43 logo. It all started with what's called BIMDA, the Bioserver Instrumentation Technology Associates Material Dispersion Apparatus. And as we all know, and anybody that's had anything to do with NASA, they love acronyms. And I certainly do as well. But microcapsules in space yesterday started, actually MIS made its maiden flight aboard the shuttle Discovery. It was sponsored by the U.S. Army Institute of Dental Research, the Army Development Command. MIS was integrated into the shuttle program under the Directorate of the Department of Defense Space Test Program. In the first flight, the shuttle astronauts performed a couple of experiments, incorporated MIS to produce time-release antibiotic microcapsules. Very significant work back in 1982. Much work has been done in the interim. Much of my work has centered upon the ability to produce microcapsules that you'll see. Microcapsules are tiny spheres, typically ranging in size from 500 to 100 micrometers. And based on the work of Dr. Taylor Wang from Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Dr. Vanderhoff from Lehigh University, all NASA researchers, and some folks at Marshall Space Flight Center, Dr. Dale Kornfeld, I don't want to slight anybody. Because of their work and their generosity, I was able to take work that those gentlemen and NASA had done and funded and to transition that for a very unique and a very special purpose. Now, what MIS did typically was to make a method of producing microcapsules in space. That was actually the first technology that was used and commercialized in space aboard the STS-43. Now, what you're going to see here, this slide is actually the microspheres that were produced, a micrograph of those produced in STS-43. The one on the right is what I am able to produce with this instrument based on the NASA technology that I've spun off. Barry, if I have a tendency to run over, please let me know. So, what I was able to do is to make microcapsules. NASA typically made 50 nanometer. With my redesign of their instrumentation, we actually produced before we even knew what to call them, nanoparticles. And this was 1983. Before you hear the buzz or before the term nanoparticles or buckyballs, we were making them. These guys at NASA were making them. Now, they didn't know what to call them either. I didn't know what to call them. And later on, we learned what to call them. They're nanoparticles. But in terms of what I was able to develop, I spun that technology into a method to produce microcapsules into which I place live organisms. In this case, organisms that produce oxoreductase, polymerase, isomerase, those types of things to break down the hydrocarbon molecule. And at about that same time, there was this little spill happened up in Alaska. So I saw the perfect opportunity to use NASA technology. I mean, the government, NASA had paid for it, the taxpayers had paid for it, to utilize that technology, transition it from the laboratory into a real world scenario. And what happened was I developed these different products, and I'm going to just hit them easily because that's not the purpose of this presentation. But I developed the BioBoom, BioSoc, WAPID, PRP, Polysorb, Microsorb, and these are environmental cleanup products. For example, you see an experiment we did back in 1992 at a place called the Black Lagoon in Cuernavaca, Mexico. This place, ladies and gentlemen, had been polluted for 60 years. Polluted, absolutely polluted. The picture in the center shows what the place looked like before treatment. The photograph on the right shows after treatment. It's my understanding, I haven't been there, I understand there are ducks there now and waterfowl. And the place, and I have reports of this literally from all over the world with regard. So what I did was to develop bioremediation products utilizing this microencapsulation apparatus, which I essentially redesigned, and that resulted in the issuance of the U.S. patent 5807724 and these products that you see before you today. And that's a copy of the patent and the various products. Now, again, that would not have been possible had this preliminary work not been done by NASA, and they literally handed me the stuff. Said, "Here, Joe, we've taken it and we've done what we can do with it, and we don't know what your ideas are in terms of making microcapsules. We make glass ones," and they still make them, by the way. And they're used for anyone that would have an interest. You can still buy these microbeads from the National Bureau of Standards. They're used to calibrate, for example, phase scanning electron microscopes that I used to have. Excellent technology. But what I did was take that basic technology, transitioned it into what I wanted it to do, and I started experimenting with different substances. And the substance that I used in my own reactor, my own bioreactors, and my own encapsulation machine was beeswax. Beeswax is an amazing substance. I undertook a comprehensive study of the matrix and the lattice of that substance. And it absolutely, if you can imagine a screen, it allows the hydrocarbon molecule to literally osmose through the cell, through the wall of the microcapsule, and that's a function of what I call the phenomenon of material transfer. I've not published on it. I did speak about it at the National Oil Spill Symposium down in Corpus Christi, Texas a few years ago, but I haven't published a technical paper on it simply because someone heckled me from the audience and I said, "Okay, you find out about it." So you do the work. But the microcapsules that I developed and that based on the NASA technology are going to be used in the future. Now, I've shown you what has happened in the past, and in the future, let's see if this one's going to work. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, so I'm not going to play this. I'm just going to breeze past it. I and a team of scientists are working to develop next generation technologies to use this same technology 30 years later to develop countermeasures in the event of attack from chemical, nuclear, and biological WMDs. Very important, very significant work, and ladies and gentlemen, the technology exists. This is not something that's 6 months or 6 weeks away. The technology's here, the technology's real, it's accessible, doable. If we need it, we have access and it's easily deployed. So thanks to NASA, we have that. We have that capability. Barry, I'm not sure if this one's going to run. This one's not going to run.
No, this one didn't run.
Okay, we'll just bypass that one too. What I was going to show you in this slide is actually the instrumentation and the emission module from the encapsulation instrument that I designed. It had built at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, by the way. So we'll just pass this one up and I'll go on to the next slide. Microencapsulation methodologies, I'm going to give you a little bit of schooling on. There are different ways. There are conventional microencapsulation methods, range from the simple aerosol atomization to the more complex coacervative spray techniques. And for most purposes, for example, drug manufacturing that was pointed to in STS-43, those are adequate. But in the case of configuration of a delivery system comprising encapsulation of these environmentally sensitive biologicals and live cells, I apologize if I'm using a lot of buzzwords here, such as bacteriophages. Very important word, and you'll come to hear a lot about it in the future. I hope you don't, but you may. Conventional encapsulation methods are inadequate. And in a nutshell, what I was able to do because of this work that was done by NASA, I discovered the fundamental problem why live cells could not be encapsulated. And it was because of the work that Wang had done and because of Dale Kornfeld's work, because of the work being done over at Lehigh. Where those gentlemen left off, I picked up and I determined that there was a fundamental force of nature, and the fundamental prohibitive force of nature that prohibited manufacture of consistently shaped microcapsules in a gravity atmosphere. Very important. Now keep in mind in STS-43 they were in a microgravity condition. No such thing as zero gravity. They were in a microgravity condition. But they were not being impacted by the sun. So I undertook the study of this phenomenon called the Coriolis effect. Oh, here's the emission module platform. But the fundamental prohibitive force of nature affecting microcapsule productions in typical gravity conditions, that's on Earth, is the Coriolis effect. And I'm sure all of you know what the Coriolis effect is. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to give you just an example of this is in your bathroom when you're using the bathroom and you see the water run down. And it's a fundamental force of nature. But what I was not able to find in the literature was anything by anyone of how that fundamental force affected the production of a microcapsule in a gravity environment. In microgravity conditions, didn't seem to matter. They're able to produce consistently shaped microcapsules, spit them out of that dual processor, just as nice as you please. But how do you do that on Earth? And when do you do it? Fundamental flaw, the fundamental force of nature that I had to consider was this, what you see in front of you, which is the Coriolis effect. Now, once I figured out a way to do that based on deflection has a lot to do with it. In terms of this diagram, the Coriolis deflection is broken into radial and tangential. But you can see all this stuff on the website. The Coriolis effect, again, you can see this stuff on the website. Read into it. If you have a deeper interest, you can contact me. The effects of the Coriolis effect in vortices during the encapsulation process. This was what NASA led me to discover, that in order to encapsulate these live cells, you couldn't use the types of high pressures that the folks in NASA were using on the space shuttle. They were using extremely high pressures. When you're trying to encapsulate live cells, these live cells are gelatinous, and they have what's called a meniscus on the cell, the outer layer of the cell. So, quite accidentally, one day, and I happened to be on the telephone talking to a NASA researcher, by the way, my machine ran out of gas, was running low on gas. So as the machine, and I'll use Nobel gases, as the machine is running out of gas, and I hear the machine on the other side of the lab going, when I hit down around 70 pounds of pressure, aha, low pressure in a vortex. And the Coriolis effect enabled me to encapsulate live cells with that instrument that I'm showing you here. The Coriolis effect and the low pressure based on NASA's technology is what enabled me to do that. In the future, we're going to be using this technology, and in fact, I've already found 2 of the 3 nuts in terms of the chem and the biological countermeasure delivery systems. And the nuke, I think I have the solution to that in terms of an element called Prussian blue, which I've shared with the folks at USAMRID. But again, this concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to field any questions. And just let me say again, I can't overexpress my thanks to NASA, to Barry, and to everyone in this room, actually, and to the U.S. taxpayers for the wonderful and enriched experience I've had in participating in the technology transfer program and being part of the NASA family. It's been my privilege. Thank you.